Have you ever met someone and felt an instant, undeniable connection, right? The conversation flows effortlessly. You can talk for hours. They get your jokes, your sense of humor, your interests. They challenge your ideas and make you feel deeply understood. And before you know it, you're thinking, well, this must be my person. But what if that feeling isn't actually intimacy, right? What if it's something else entirely different? Today, we're talking about what I call the intellectual intimacy illusion, right? A common trap that can make us mistake stimulating conversation, shared insights, and mental chemistry for true relational compatibility. Because often we think that, long late night conversations, bonding over ideas, talking about psychology, spirituality, philosophy, attachment theory, right, means that we are deeply connected. And while those things can absolutely create closeness, they don't always equal emotional intimacy. And that's the distinction that matters, especially in anxious and avoidant dynamics. So, what is intellectual connection versus emotional connection? So, intellectual connection is about sharing ideas, perspectives, and mental stimulation, right? It's feeling mentally seen, it's curiosity, it's excitement, around thinking and together. Emotional connection, however, is different. Emotional connection is about being emotionally accessible and emotionally responsive, right? It's the ability to stay present with feelings, your own and someone else's, without shutting down, without fixing or escaping. And here's where things get interesting. Anxious attachers deeply need emotional attunement to feel safe, to feel supported and secure. Avoidants, on the other hand, often feel very comfortable in intellectual bonding. Right? They can talk for hours about ideas and systems or even psychology. But when conversations move towards, vulnerable emotional processing, that's where a wall sometimes appears. Not because they don't care, but because that emotional muscle often hasn't been practiced. And if you're listening and, you lean a little bit avoidant or a lot avoidant, I really, really want you to hear this. You're not doomed. Emotional attunement is a skill that absolutely can be learned. So think of emotions like a muscle. You were designed to have them, but if that muscle isn't used regularly, right, it weakens. And when you begin exercising it, it feels uncomfortable at first, not natural. So research in neuroplasticity shows that our brains change through repeated emotional experiences and intentional relational practice. In other words, the capacity to connect emotionally can grow over time. And I saw this dynamic so clearly in my last relationship of 7 years. We had so much in common. We loved talking about philosophy, psychology, how people think, human behavior, all of it. And we could spend hours discussing these ideas and these perspectives. And for many years, I believed that meant that we were, emotionally compatible. And in some ways, it did create a strong bond. We shared similar worldviews. We could analyze anything together, and that brought us close. But as the relationship moved out of the honeymoon phase, which lasted a while because we were doing long distance, and into the power struggle phase, something shifted. When deeper emotional hurdles came up, things felt harder. Intellectually, we could explain why we were struggling, but emotionally, neither of us felt truly seen, right? We understood each other's logic, but we weren't meeting each other emotionally. And that distinction changed everything. For example, I could intellectually understand why he wasn't able to meet my emotional needs at the time. He was under a lot of stress, building our house and trying to keep everything moving forward. And he could logically understand why I felt frustrated too, with all the hurdles and constant challenges we were facing. So intellectually, we both made sense to each other. But emotionally, something was missing. He couldn't turn off and simply be present with me. And what I needed most in that season was presence. The emotional attunement that comes with someone slowing down enough to truly meet you where you are. I didn't need solutions or explanations or excuses. I needed to feel seen. I needed to feel felt. And because that emotional presence wasn't there, I couldn't feel truly seen in the chaos of all of it. This quiet suppression went on for many, many years, right? Because logic can always make sense of why things are hard or why someone is the way they are. But emotions don't disappear because the reasons are understandable, right? They still need space, they need acknowledgement, and they need connection. And eventually, understanding each other intellectually just wasn't enough. Our emotions still needed a place to land. And when they didn't, distance slowly grew between us. And this kind of dynamic may sound familiar if you've experienced, anxious avoidant relationships. For example, a situation I hear often with couples is the anxious partner tries to talk about feelings and reassurance or deeper meaning behind the relationships, and the avoidant partner responds logically, changes the topic or just kind of goes quiet. And then the anxious partner interprets this as disinterest or rejection, and the avoidant feels overwhelmed or unsure what to say, so they retreat. Other common examples, in emotional misalignment is the anxious partner wants emotional processing after conflict. The avoidant partner wants to move on quickly or solve the problem, practically. Or, an anxious attacher may say things like, tell me why you love me, or try to talk about the future in some way. And the avoidant partner hits a wall. Not because they don't care, but because deeper emotional self-reflection feels unfamiliar or unsafe. The conversation just kind of stops. And that silence feels really devastating for the anxious partner and like massive, massive hurt. So learning about attachment styles isn't enough on its own. My ex was open to learning attachment theory, he was open to learning about a lot of things, all of it. And I remember thinking, wow, like this is amazing. Someone who's open-minded and curious and self-aware. But awareness didn't automatically translate into emotional change, and it doesn't translate into action. Understanding avoidant attachment intellectually didn't mean he prioritized the emotional work needed to create secure connection. Work, hobbies, goals, those always stayed at the top. And I kept telling him throughout our relationship, relationship health needs to be prioritized too, or eventually, there won't be a relationship at all. And I don't think the depth of that statement really landed until it was too late. So, if you're avoidant and you're listening to this, please don't wait until it's too late. Get the support that you need. And if you're anxious, please assess your boundaries and learn how to advocate for them. You both deserve to feel loved and supported. So, why avoidants often seek help at the breaking point is interesting, right? This is something that I see frequently in my coaching practice. Avoidants often seek coaching or therapy after a breakup or a major rupture in the relationship when the emotional costs become undeniable. And honestly, that's not unusual. For many people, pain becomes the catalyst for growth. People are finally realizing that secure relationships aren't optional to well-being. Research like the Harvard study of adult development, one of the longest running studies on happiness, consistently shows that strong, emotionally supportive relationships are one of the biggest predictors of life satisfaction and health outcomes, right? Relational health isn't extra credit. It's foundational. And just a side note, because I've been asked this before, this is also one reason why two avoidant partners can sometimes stay in a relationship for a very long time, because the intellectual component creates a sense of mental safety and shared understanding that makes the relationship feel functional and stable. They may communicate well, logically, respect each other's independence, and avoid the emotional intensity that can feel overwhelming. Is that functional? Yes, it absolutely can be. Is it emotionally fulfilling? I would argue not always, at least based on many stories I've heard from clients who grew up watching parents in this dynamic. Often there was respect, cooperation, but a quiet emotional distance underneath it all. And while that may work for many people, you can start to see how intellectual connection alone can sustain a relationship without necessarily creating deep emotional intimacy. And just remember that, you can feel deeply understood intellectually and still feel emotionally alone, which is how I felt for a very long time. And that's what makes this illusion so tricky. because intellectual intimacy feels like closeness. It feels safe. It feels mature. But without emotional attunement, eventually one or both partners feels unseen. And if you're an anxious attacher, this gap becomes increasingly painful over time. Intellectual connection creates mental safety. It's where we feel understood through ideas and logic and shared perspectives and curiosity. Emotional connection, though, creates relational safety. It's where we feel seen and emotionally held in real time. And healthy relationships need both. The way we build this is by not just talking about emotions, but slowing down enough to actually experience them together. And that looks like pausing the analysis, naming what you feel in the moment, staying present when things get vulnerable, and responding with empathy rather than solutions. And if you're just getting started in the attachment world, check out the Secure Self Toolkit filled with attachment rewiring meditations to help you feel secure in just minutes. We have some communication scripts in there, a trigger guide, a secure self blueprint, and practical tools to help you create healthier patterns in life, dating, and relationships. And if you need deeper one-on-one support, you can book a free consultation with me via the link in the caption. And as always, keep asking yourself, what would secure me do?